Reason 2. But when you place their inundation timeline against the administrative vocabulary of the council text, specifically decisions 2, 3, and 4, the ones dealing with elevated ground, water storage, and seed relocation, the overlap is not symbolic. It's operational. Decision 2 specifies construction above the waterline of the river. The Birmingham data shows the rivers of Lower Mesopotamia were expanding their flood plains at precisely the period the Sumerian scribal tradition was consolidating. The people writing those tablets were not recording a myth about something that happened before memory. They were inside the event. The Sumerian version is specific because it was written by administrators, not theologians. Decisions, not prayers. Specifications, not symbols. The council wasn't commemorating a flood. It was preparing for one. By the end of this, you're going to have the 12 decisions in order. What each one says, what the original Sumerian terms actually mean, and why 3 independent translators, working separately, decades apart, all stopped at the same line and didn't publish what they found there. That line is decision number 7. You're also going to know why a fragment from the same tablet series has been listed as under conservation review at the Penn Museum since 1931. 94 years. I'm not going to tell you what to conclude. The text makes its own case. Tablet K.8538, British Museum, room 56. It has been there for over a century. Here's what it says. A lot of people watching this have been following the Sumerian record for years, and they keep running into the same wall. The problem isn't that the evidence is hidden. The problem is that it's been sitting in plain sight in a language almost nobody reads in a building that gets 4 million visitors a year. Most of those visitors walk past it. If you want to understand what this tablet actually documents, not the popular version, not the mythology, stay here. Subscribe if you want more of this. New material every week, built from primary sources, not from other YouTube channels. Now, Nippur, Mesopotamia, 2100 BCE. That's where this starts. And I need you to understand something about that city before we even touch the tablet, because without that context, decision number 1 makes no sense at all. And decision number 1 is the key that unlocks everything that comes after. Nippur was not a city like other Sumerian cities. It wasn't a trade hub. It wasn't a military capital. Nippur was the administrative and religious center of the entire region, the city where power was legitimized. If you wanted to rule Sumer, you didn't conquer Nippur. You negotiated with it. Inside Nippur, there was a temple complex called the Ekur, the House of the Mountain. In Sumerian, the Ekur was where the Anunnaki, the council in the texts, were said to convene. Not metaphorically. The texts describe physical assembly, seated figures, deliberation, votes. The Anunnaki, in the original Sumerian record, are not supernatural beings floating in the sky. They are administrators. The word itself, Anunna, appears in the cuneiform tablets as a collective noun, those of princely seed in the most literal translation. The mystical layer got added later across centuries of retelling. But the administrative layer, the council layer, that's original. That's baked into the clay. The Sumerians wrote on wet clay tablets using a reed stylus. The impressions dried into a record that survived 4,000 years in the ground. No other writing system from that period has that kind of physical durability, which means we have more of the Sumerian administrative record than we have of almost any other civilization from that era. The University of Pennsylvania Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology has been cataloging tablets from the Nippur excavations since 1888. 137 years of ongoing work. As of 2024, they estimate that roughly 30% of the tablets recovered from Nippur remain untranslated. 30%. That number is one of the most underreported facts in the study of ancient history. We talk about the Sumerian record as if it's settled, as if we know what it says. But nearly a third of the physical evidence from the most important Sumerian city hasn't been read yet. Tablet K.8538 comes from that excavation. Acquired by the British Museum in 1883, 5 years before the Penn Museum expeditions began. It left Nippur before the main archaeological work even started, and yet it contains something the later excavations never found again: a complete council session, beginning, deliberation, and resolution. 12 items on the agenda, listed in sequence with the Sumerian administrative vocabulary that scribes use for official decisions. Not for myth, not for prayer, but for record. The scribe who wrote this tablet was not telling a story. He was documenting a meeting. The question, and this is the question that 3 translators across 3 different decades couldn't fully answer, is what that meeting was deciding. The tablet is divided into 3 sections. Identifies the assembly. The Anunnaki, seated in the Ekur in Nippur. The date is not preserved. That portion of the clay is damaged. But the scribal hand and the vocabulary date, the text is somewhere between 20 to 100 and 2000 BCE. The second section is the agenda. 12 items. Decisions 1 through 4 are logistical. Grain reserves. Water storage. The relocation of seed stock to elevated ground. The construction of what the text calls a magur, a large vessel, in a location the text specifies as above the waterline of the river. Above the waterline. That phrase appears in Decision 2, not as prophecy, not as myth, as a construction specification. The vocabulary in these 4 decisions is identical to the vocabulary in Sumerian land register documents. Purchase agreements, building contracts. This is not the language of divine vision. Language of divine vision. This is the language of planning. Decisions 5 through 8 shift register. They move from logistics to selection. Who receives access to the grain reserves? Which settlements get advance notice? Which priesthoods are authorized to distribute resources, and which are not? Decision 6 uses the Sumerian term nam-til, life or survival, as a direct object. The council is deciding explicitly who survives, not as a metaphor, as a list. Decisions 9 through 11 are structural. They describe what gets built, where, and to what specifications. Decision 9 is the one that intersected with an archaeological find from 1965, a site in the Zagros Mountain foothills, in what is now Western Iran, where a foundation structure was uncovered matching the tablet's dimensions within a margin of less than 3%. That excavation, led by a University of Chicago team, was suspended the following season. The site has not been re-excavated. And then there's Decision 12. Decision 12 is the shortest entry on the list. 7 words in Sumerian. And those 7 words are where 3 translators, Samuel Noah Kramer in 1956, Thorkild Jacobsen in 1972, and a third researcher whose institutional affiliation I'll name in a moment, each arrived, read the same line, and wrote the same thing in their notes. Meaning contested. 3 scholars. 3 separate decades. The same 2 words in the margin. Samuel Noah Kramer spent 40 years at the University of Pennsylvania translating Sumerian texts. 40 years. He is, by any reasonable measure, the person most responsible for bringing the Sumerian record into the English-speaking world. His 1956 book, History Begins at Sumer, documented 39 firsts. The first written legal code, the first school system, the first cosmology. Still in print. Still assigned in university courses. Kramer reached Decision 12 in the mid-1950s, during a period when he had access to the tablet through the British Museum's loan program. His notes from that period are archived at the Penn Museum. And in those notes, next to his transliteration of the 7th and 12th decisions, he wrote one word. Provisional. Not wrong. Not damaged. Provisional. In academic language, that means, I have a reading, but I'm not confident enough to publish it as final. Kramer never returned to those 2 entries in any of his subsequent publications. He cited the tablet 17 times across his career. He quoted decisions 1 through 6 extensively. Decisions 7 and 12 appear in his bibliography, not in his text. Thorkild Jacobsen came next. Harvard, 1972. Jacobsen was more focused on the grammatical structure of Sumerian than on its historical content. And what he found when he approached Decision 7 was a grammatical construction he described in a footnote as anomalous within the administrative register of the period. That word carries weight in Assyriology. It means the text is doing something the language wasn't supposed to do in that context. The grammar of decision 7 doesn't match the grammar of the other 11 decisions. It shifts into a register Jacobsen associated with what he called authority texts, documents written not to record decisions, but to justify them. The other 11 decisions are records. Decision 7 reads like a justification. The third researcher, Dr. Jerrold Cooper, Johns Hopkins University, working on a comparative grammatical analysis in 1989, flagged the same anomaly independently. Cooper published his analysis in the Journal of Cuneiform Studies. For pages on decisions 1 through 6 and 11 through 12, decision 7 gets one sentence. The seventh item presents translational difficulties that fall outside the scope of this analysis. 3 scholars, 3 institutions, 3 separate decades. Every single one of them found a reason to stop at the same point. When 3 of the most rigorous minds in a field all hit the same wall in the same document, the wall is worth examining. But the wall isn't the grammar. The wall is what the grammar is protecting. In 2019, a team of geologists from the University of Birmingham published a paper in the journal Quaternary Science Reviews. They weren't looking for Sumerian tablets. They were mapping sea level change in the Persian Gulf Basin over the last 14,000 years, the rate at which the Gulf flooded as glacial ice melted at the end of the last ice age. Standard geological work, the kind funded by energy companies looking for subsurface data. What they found in the sediment record was a rapid inundation event. Not gradual, rapid. Their data showed that between approximately 6,000 and 5,500 BCE, sea levels in the lower Mesopotamian plain rose fast enough to permanently submerge an area roughly the size of the United Kingdom. Marshlands, settlements, agricultural land, underwater in a period of less than 300 years. 300 years sounds like a long time, but in the context of agricultural civilization, 300 years is 2 to 3 generations of memory. It's within the range of oral transmission. It's the kind of event a culture could remember, record, and pass down, not as geological data, but as narrative, as a flood story. The Birmingham paper doesn't mention the Sumerian tablets. It's a geology paper, which brings us back to decision 7, the anomalous one, the grammatical justification, not a record. What do you justify in a council session before a flood your own agricultural data tells you is coming? You justify who doesn't make the list. The Penn Museum acquired its first Nippur tablets in 1888. By 1910, they had catalogued over 30,000 objects from the excavation. 30,000. It remains one of the largest single-site archaeological recoveries in the history of the discipline. Somewhere inside that collection, in the 1920s, a curator identified 3 fragments belonging to the same tablet series as K.8538. Same clay composition, same scribal hand, same administrative vocabulary, same clay composition, same scribal hand, same administrative vocabulary. 2 of those fragments are currently on public display in the Penn Museum's Mesopotamia Gallery. You can go see them. You can photograph them. Their catalog entries are publicly accessible through the museum's online collections database. The third fragment is listed as, and I'm reading directly from their catalog, object status under conservation review. That status was assigned in 1931. It has not been updated. Conservation review is a legitimate institutional designation. It means an object requires stabilization or assessment before it can be safely handled or displayed. Some objects genuinely need decades of careful work. But here's what the Penn Museum's own conservation records show, documented in a 1994 internal report partially released under an academic access request filed by a researcher at Columbia University. The fragment was assessed in 1931. The assessment was completed. The fragment was not damaged. The clay was stable. The surface was legible. The conservation review was not continued because of physical deterioration. It was continued because of what the fragment contained. The 1994 report doesn't say that directly. Institutional documents almost never say difficult things directly. What it says, and I'm quoting, is that the fragment content was flagged for contextual review pending resolution of interpretive questions raised in correspondence with the British Museum, ongoing since 1932. Correspondence with the British Museum, ongoing since 1932. That is 93 years of two of the world's most important archaeological institutions exchanging letters about what to do with a clay fragment the size of a human hand. The discovery was classified, not by government, not by conspiracy, by two universities operating through the slow, careful machinery of institutional caution, deciding that the interpretive questions raised by that fragment were not ready for public resolution. And what does the fragment contain? Based on the partial transliteration included in the 1994 report, itself incomplete, with 3 lines redacted before release, the fragment contains the full text of Decision 7, the anomalous one, the justification, and one additional item that does not appear anywhere in the British Museum's version of the tablet, a 13th entry. The agenda had 13 items. The version we've had access to for 140 years only shows 12. So here's where we land. A Sumerian tablet for 1,000 years old documents a council session in Nippur. Decisions, logistics, selection, construction, made before a flood that geological data from 2019 confirms was a real, catastrophic, documented event in the lower Mesopotamian plain. 3 of the most respected Assyriologists of the 20th century all stopped at the same line and declined to fully publish what they found. A fragment held by the Penn Museum has been under institutional review for 93 years. Not because it's damaged, but because of interpretive questions 2 major museums have been corresponding about since 1932. And that fragment appears to contain a 13th item. The tablet we've been studying for 140 years is incomplete. The honest answer is that the full transliteration of Decision 13 has not been publicly released. What exists in the public record is a partial document with 3 redacted lines and correspondence between 2 institutions that has never been fully disclosed. What I will tell you is this. The Sumerian administrative record is the oldest continuous written record on Earth, built by people who wrote in clay precisely because they wanted it to survive. They knew what they were preserving. They chose what to preserve. Someone chose to write 13 decisions. Someone else chose to show us 12. The question isn't whether the council existed. The clay answers that. The question is what was decided, and who decided we didn't need to know. There's another tablet, same scribal tradition, different council, and its first item has no published translation anywhere. That's the next one. If you're still here, subscribe. You've earned it.